everyone. This is Tony Nash with Complete Intelligence. Thanks for joining us for another quick hit. Today, we're talking with Nick Glinsman of Evo Capital. Nick is based in Brazil, and he brings decades of experience to macro and markets and politics. So we're really lucky to have him today. Nick, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and about Evo?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a British expat here in Brazil, and actually stuck in Brazil right now because of the pandemic and mismanagement thereof. And but my background is basically London and New York, with quite a bit of Europe, and a way back when Australia and Hong Kong. Very much a macro person. It's been 30 plus years, both on the sell side with Salomon Brothers and Merrill Lynch. The former was my last sell side position, where I ran futures in Europe on a global basis. And then subsequent to that, buy side with occasional, what I define as reverse repos into either a VC situation or another small shop, but centered around a very large macro firm that I will leave nameless, but people that know me
Sure.
and can join the lines. But running decent sized capital with people I had nothing but the highest respect for, that you could continue learning. And I'm still, doing a lot of advisory work, taking a break from running capital, may come back, may not, but I'm enjoying the, shall we say, the ability to express via prose some views on the markets, views on the interaction between geopolitics and macroeconomics in the markets.
It's great. Thanks for that. And we're really lucky to have you. I think knowing people who really understand the interplay of politics, economics, markets is rare. It's hard to find somebody who can put a cohesive story together there. And those are the kind of people we try to find for quick hits. So it's great to have you. Nick, for a while, you've talked about this concept called the Anglosphere. And I think if people read your tweets or see some of your writing, I think there's an assumption that people may know what that means. But I want to, if you can take a minute, can you help us understand what you mean by the Anglosphere?
We'll dig into it. I like the fact that you're talking about the link between geopolitics and economics, because I think that really, with Trump and even Brexit, that's where what was a very boring macro environment suddenly started to become differently exciting,
right?
Because the politics would start to drive some of the macro markets. And actually, what's interesting is, I've just mentioned it, Brexit and Trump, part of the Anglosphere, not the formative part of the Anglosphere. So what we mean by the Anglosphere is looking at countries that are historically tied via culture, but critically also via common law, the legal system, because that defines how the economy and how commerce can run. And you find it's very, if you go back in history, as you well know, there is a big difference between common law countries and Roman law countries.
Sure.
Roman law countries think of European Union countries and that construct. So what we mean by the Anglosphere is, being a Brit, I'll start with the UK, because it is the mother country. It's still the mother country for where you are. Currently, it's still. So we're looking at
we were part of Mexico in Texas. So.
Yeah, that's true, actually. But it really is essentially, if the US were now part of the Commonwealth, you're looking at an Anglosphere. Now, typically when I refer to it, I'm talking about UK, US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Five Eyes. Now, if you add, you could loosely add two countries, one of which has an Anglo-Saxon common law. India. The other one works extremely close, much closer as a defeated country in World War II, Japan. So you're getting the Quad, which I would maintain is part of an Anglosphere influence, at least, if not Anglosphere entity. So you look at, but let's stick with that grouping. You're looking at countries that have a similar legal system, similar financial structure. They have banks, central banks that are lenders of last resort in the traditional bag-hot concept. Remember, the European Union doesn't have a bank that's a lender of last resort.
Right.
Back to common law. Common law also, in this environment, this is where it's getting critical. So Five Eyes is, I would posit, it's the ultimate defense alliance.
Even New Zealand still?
You know,
long discussion. I say that somewhat sarcastically.
Kim Jong Ahern, yes, I know what you're saying. Although she has got a relation in the state of Victoria in Australia, who is actually known as Kim Jong Dan. And I agree with you, but if you look at what they've just done with the central bank, there is still a similarity there.
Right.
And of course, the travel corridor that's about to open on the 16th, I think it is between Australia and New Zealand.
Right.
So as much as she kowtows to the panda in Beijing, they are still part of that structure. So back to the common law and the financial. So you've got countries with central banks that act as lenders of last resort with independent monetary policy. You have independent fiscal policy. And I would include, of course, in both these, Bank of Japan and RBI and India, so on. So you've got independent fiscal policy, independent monetary central bank, which you don't have in Europe, right? You just don't have. There's been no Hamiltonian moment there. So you have that flexibility, and you can see that flexibility. You also have much more of common law enables Schumpeter's creative destruction and thus reconfiguration.
Sure.
Much easier, Chapter 11 in the US or bankruptcy and start again.
Right.
Not so easy to either stop or start under Roman law. So that
punitive.
When you think of where we are now, we've gone through a pandemic where inexplicably, a lot of countries have remained closed. The reopening is going to need that reconfiguration.
Right.
You've also been the countries that are advancing with the vaccine quickest are those that took a very commercial view as governments in terms of getting the vaccine. So you had Operation Warp Speed in the US, and you had a VC person take over the procurement policy and the vaccine policy in the UK. Bingham. I'm sure she's called Lady
Private sector innovation, right?
Private sector innovation. And in fact, in the UK, you have that triangle, Oxford, Cambridge, London. It's renowned biotech and so on and so forth. Very flexible.
Right.
And what do we have? You even have a situation where the famous AstraZeneca factory in Holland was financed by the British.
Of course.
Not by the Dutch.
Right, yeah.
So we can get into that on another episode on the vaccine debacle, but I think that's part of the precautionary Roman law system that the EU runs versus the go-get innovative system that comes with the Anglo-Saxon countries, the common law system, and the structure of finance, business, so on and so forth.
Okay, so it sounds to me like when you talk about the Anglosphere and you look at it kind of post-pandemic, or at least post first wave of disaster in the pandemic as we enter a recovery, it sounds like you see a widening divergence between those with, say, common law and relatively independent central banks versus the other law formed, be it Roman
and
or
independent fiscal policy as well. That's
okay,
also
and independent fiscal policy. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So help me understand so we just had this IMF report come out earlier this week about 5.1% growth or whatever this year, and everything's amazing, and which we know, given it's all base effects, and if you do a 3-year average, it doesn't look good at all. So what's different about, which in Europe, the only one over that 3 years, the only one with positive growth is the Netherlands, not even the UK. But I would argue they lean toward, more of a British style than, other styles. Anyway.
1868, I should remind you of.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So if we're having a 2-speed or multi-speed recovery, would it be fair for me to say that you believe the Anglosphere will recover faster than the other spheres?
Absolutely.
Sinosphere and Francosphere.
Absolutely. You're a better expert on Sinosphere than I would be, but I think the growth is going to disappoint because they pushed so hard on the string of debt. Okay. In terms of the Europe, I think there's a very simple way of looking at things. It's extent of vaccination and compare those. And what does that mean? There is a wonderful graph that I've used where you can see where it's now being said out of UCL, University College London, UK is herd immunity on Monday, 73%. Okay? Oh, okay, fine. You can see there's data coming out of the UK that is explosive, as there is in the US. You're not really. People are looking at the European data and thinking, okay.
Let's close until August.
Yeah, well, it's going to be closed beyond, because this vaccine debacle is even worse. Everybody's going to take AstraZeneca in Europe, even though for the young women of age, I think it is below 30, the chance of getting a blood clot is 1 in 600,000, whereas the chance of getting COVID is substantially greater.
Right.
So, because Europe and the Roman legal system has this precautionary bent,
right,
as opposed to, it's clear that this whole debacle in Europe has delayed their coming out of lockdown.
Oh yeah.
So that the European summer season, as the Germans would say, is kaput.
Yep.
Right.
So.
Okay, Italians already recognize that.
So let's talk a little bit of specifics. So if we have this kind of 2-speed recovery or multi-speed recovery, and let's say Japan is part of the Anglosphere, okay? So would you say Japan would be leading Asia out instead of China? Now, I'm talking about real data. I'm not talking about Chinese 8.1% growth numbers like fictional. I'm talking about actual real performance with actual real usable output and all this other stuff.
I've got a sense that that's going to be the case, actually.
Okay.
I really do have that sense. And I also, especially given the belligerence of the Chinese regime right now, vocal as well as practical, you've got vocal and slightly belligerent actions against Taiwan, of course, which I'm with Albert on that. I think they'd have already invaded if they were going to do it. And you've got what's going on in the Philippine Islands with all these ships tied together.
Right.
So I as much as there's that, I remember a very famous situation where chief China economist from HSBC came into the office and talking about China, and then we asked, coming into that particular office, name unmentioned, always an aggressive to and fro on Q&A. And then one of us, I think it was me even, asked about China. How's the recovery going after Fukushima? Blood was coming out of this chap's mouth, having to talk a bit about China. And we know that it's a much more passionate, we have passion against Germany or France as a Brit or as an Englishman come soccer. But
sure.
We love each other.
Maybe that's a bit strong, but
we'll use strong for the Germans, but with the French, there is a deep passion there. And somebody keeps reminding me Agincourt. But in the Far East, there has been that. You see that tension with the South Koreans and Japanese.
Sure.
However, the Chinese are forcing people out, away from some of this stuff. So I tend to think that Japan, and actually I also think that Japan with Australia and India will enable a lot of these countries to look elsewhere. Isn't it ironic, going back to the Anglosphere link, and publicly it's United Arab Emirates who are being given credit for getting India, Pakistan talking together. I have no doubt behind the show, the English are very active there because you've got a cricketer in charge of who made his name in. So there's stuff going on that gives you signals as to what could be happening. It was rather like a mutual friend of ours. We were discussing India in terms of trade, and I was saying, the UK and India are going to have a free trade deal as soon as it's possible, once they've overcome some of the agricultural stuff. And that person said, India will do a trade with the EU well before they do it with the UK. And I'm saying, hold your horses. No way will that happen. It's familiar. Two, one of the problems that the EU's had with trade deals with Anglo-Saxon countries is legal interpretation thereof.
That's right.
And, I think they've been discussing it for 8-10 years, EU and India.
Yeah.
And they've got a sub-agreement already in the UK after several months.
Right.
So
I think you're right. So just coming back to this kind of overall topic of the Anglosphere and the multi-speed recoveries. So it does sound like you almost have this triangulated recovery from your perspective from India, Japan, and Australia that's leading the way in Asia. You have the UK, which is leading the way for Europe. And then you have the US that's kind of leading the way for the Americas. Is that kind of how you see things?
I tend to think that's the case, but I wonder whether one can justify the idea of UK leading the way for Europe, given the tensions between the UK and the EU.
I think the EU will
all the way through.
The EU will feel pain until they get tired of it, and then they'll relent, I think.
Well, I think there's one big problem, and this came up yesterday. There was a meeting of the EU Commission about Article 122 vaccine export ban. Belgium, Holland, Sweden, and Ireland said, no way. All the others were saying, we're okay with it. With Germany covering itself with a few conditions. As they
sure.
The damage to Europe's role in the global supply chain is irreparable. They will not be able to go back to this. And there's another little factor which makes me wonder what will happen with Ireland, because there's tension building up in Northern Ireland again. Article 122, that export ban is specifically aimed at UK, US, Canada, Australia. They've stopped shipping to Australia already. US, UK, they're not, they're saying, well, you're not exporting anything. Paid for everything, but not exporting everything.
Right.
And Canada just gets lumped in with the US and the UK.
Right.
So I think that's really shattered the role of Europe in the global supply chain. Yes, you'll have people producing goods for Europe from European input. But how can you possibly? Now, going to Ireland, where the UK has already said we'll give the Republic of Ireland 3.7 million vaccines because it secures Northern Ireland coming out of lockdown. That's an interesting little thought process.
Right.
Because you have a situation where Ireland is under attack like the Netherlands and Switzerland from Joe Biden's global tax.
Right. That's right.
If they come out, wouldn't that be funny?
That would be interesting. So let me, okay, so, and I really need to wrap this up because we try to keep people within, say, 10 to 20 minutes so that viewers don't spend too much time. But it seems to me that what you're also saying is there's likely some kind of regionalization or re-regionalization that may emerge from this. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that?
No, I would go and say US and Commonwealth, EU, for as long as it stays stable, which may be problematic. And then, as you say, Asia.
Okay.
China.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're coming to a place, and I've been talking about this since about 2015, where you have global supply chains for goods that are long-term commoditized goods, and then you have regional supply chains for the higher value goods.
And that's consistent with the decoupling that's got to take place against China.
That's right.
And then you have that floater, which you and I touched on before we got online, which is Russia. And I have a slightly different view of where that can go, which will be, you and I can see us doing a box set.
Let's do it. Let's do it. Let's rotate our friend who's a Russia expert in. Let's rotate some other people in, and we'll have a really good time with it.
Because this is a never-ending subject. But what's critical is even if we may be talking out of the box on a big picture topic, there are trades here. There are macro positions.
Yes, there are.
It will take a long time to develop, but boy, are they going to be profitable.
Yeah. Yes, there are.
Inflation is part of it. Reconfiguration. So on and so forth.
Yes. Nick, thank you so much for your time. This is hugely valuable. I really can't
I'll see you same time next week. How's that?
Yeah, I really can't wait for the next chat. For everyone watching, please subscribe, please link, please give comments. And thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate you watching this quick hit episode. So thanks very much.